Are we ready? Awesome. So I guess we did save the best for the last. I'm Siddharth Mazumdar. I'm an environmental engineering graduate student.
Hi, my name is Afi, as you all know. I'm also a master's student doing my environmental engineering.
My name is Caroline Cloud. I'm a senior in the School of Sustainability, undergrad, not grad. And this is our project. We worked over the course of the semester at the town of Gilbert on improving their bulk recycling. So just to give some background information as to why recycling is important for this project, we have a few interesting facts. So Americans produce more than 250 million tons of garbage per year, which equates to filling a stadium 2 times per day. So in one day you fill a stadium 2 times. Another fun fact is creating products from recycled material can save up to 98% of energy than producing things from new materials. So over the course of the semester, we will kind of talk about how we refined, researched, reduced, repurposed, and made recommendations for the town of Gilbert. Bulk waste actually makes up a huge proportion of waste streams throughout the country, and Gilbert recognizes that this is an extremely important aspect and area to increase diversion, and in order to create a sustainable community, it's really important to create a more integrated waste system that is efficient and innovative. So for the current scenario, just to give some background information as to what Gilbert actually does currently, they have 4 zones, which is divided A through Z, and bulk A through D, not Z. That would be a lot of zones. But Gilbert actually has a unique situation where they actually own their trucks, so they don't contract out to Waste Management or Republic Services. Also, for those who don't know, bulk trash is basically anything that doesn't fit in your household rolling bin that you take to the end of your driveway once a week. So these things can include things like furniture, mattresses, dishwashers, yard waste, glass, things along those lines. So essentially these things are collected through numerous programs such as pickup, or residents can haul it themselves to transfer stations. There are cardboard drop-off facilities throughout the town. People have the option of actually donating their items, which decreases the amount of things going to the landfill. And there's also a special appliance recycling program, which you have to call and make an appointment. So essentially, these things are then taken to a transfer station, and they have 3 in which Germain actually has a majority of the waste. So we had this research laid out for us, but we kind of wanted to conduct our own experiments to get a better understanding of where residents were, and then what the waste was. Really, we didn't really know what the waste was made up of. So Gilbert was actually able to provide this service for us and the data. Within one day, they had 5 trucks go out and service 650 homes, and the data shows, as you can see, that a majority is green waste, which is extreme. That's really great results, especially for that sample size. So in that day, they collected 56.58 pounds of waste per home, which is actually a little over 18 tons of waste. It's also important to note that these trucks, there were 5 trucks, each collected waste by type. So one truck collected green waste, one truck collected metal, one truck collected cardboard. So we could specifically see by the source exactly what and how much was being wasted and was being collected through the bulk waste service. So that was really important data that we were then given. And also the diversion rate was over 71%, which in theory is amazing if that is the entire town. So another thing we wanted to do was do a residential satisfaction survey. So we worked with the digital communications team with Gilbert. We conducted a 4-question survey, basically to find out if residents were willing to expand their service or even be open to any changes, and if they had any ideas as to what programs they might be interested in. And the results were actually very interesting. The majority, around 46%, were expressed they were very interested in expanding bulk waste service at all, which is amazing because we didn't say this is the example. They said, yeah, sure, we're interested, totally interested. And then the other percentage was, I think it was 53%, said they were not willing to take anything to a bulk waste facility. So that means that they're willing to it to change, but they're not going to take it anywhere, which is important because if we build a facility and more than half the residents don't want to do it, then what's the point? So that was really interesting. And another area that we had open was for residents to suggest programs. And two of the most notable ones were creating a green waste program and increasing communication of bulk waste throughout the city.
Okay, so through the course of our project, we're looking at the problems, and we realized that one of the best approaches would be to look at 3 existing techniques and to see if they could be implemented for the town of Gilbert. And we came across this database called the EPA Region 9 Best Management Practices. And during our research, we found out that there are 3 main components for the waste management value chain. So the first were the cities who actually took initiative to be more sustainable in their waste. The second was strategic partnerships with profit and nonprofit organizations and to have a symbiotic relationship between them. And the third were the initiatives and the innovative ideas that these cities had undertaken to be more sustainable in their ways. A great example is that of the Curb Up project taken by the city of Oceanside in California. So what they basically do is they partner with Goodwill and Waste Management, and they pick up the bulk trash, take it to the Goodwill outlet center, where Goodwill salvages all the bulk waste they think they can, and then from there it is whatever's left is transported back to the landfill. And that is a great way of reducing the bulk waste, recycling, reusing, and repurposing the waste that has actually been diverted from the landfill. Another great example is that of mattress recycling, which is done in the city of Eugene. And basically what they do is they take old mattresses, see if they can repair it and reuse it. And if they cannot, they separate all the components of these mattresses and they repurpose it and use it for other things. Another great idea that we found out was partnering with nonprofit organizations that were willing to act as drop-off facilities, which meant a lot of cost avoidance in the city actually building a bulk waste facilities for the residents to go and drop it off. We also wanted to look at cities and towns within the valley to see what they were doing and how effective it was for them, and to see if any of this would directly apply to the town of Gilbert. And so we looked at these 4 major cities, and we realized that they kind of had a common theme going on between them. So the first one is partnership with nonprofit organizations such as Stardust and Goodwill for bulk volume reduction. And so a good example is that with the city of Tempe, where Stardust, a nonprofit organization, goes out before the bulk pickup, looks at the bulk trash, picks up whatever they think they can salvage, which means there is a great reduction in the volume that actually has to be picked up by the city. And this also means diversion from the landfill, which is not only sustainable economically, sustainable environmentally, but also economically, because that would mean cost avoidance in the tipping fees for the landfill. Another common thing that we noticed was the emphasis on green waste and composting organics, which kind of correlates with the development of new infrastructure like composting and recycling facilities. A great example that we saw was that of Phoenix, which recently, I think in April, opened the 27th Avenue compost facility. And I know that Phoenix is a big city and they have a lot of money, but this is just an idea and an example that we think we could either duplicate in a smaller scale or sort of take ideas from and improve them to best fit the need for Gilbert. The last common theme that we did notice was initiative targeted towards high volume items such as Christmas trees and mattresses. Christmas trees all throughout US, you do have them. And so what most of these cities do is mulch them, turn them into compost, and use them as topsoils for their parks and other public spaces like schools. And also with mattresses, like I previously mentioned, they take the different components and then try and repurpose it. So having done this research and having the knowledge that we collected, we kind of had like a good idea about the direction that we wanted the town of Gilbert to go towards.
Right. So as Nicole said earlier, transportation is a really important aspect of any value chain because it cuts across throughout the life cycle of that process, and therefore happens to be a major contributor to the impact that any of these services and processes have. Also, as good as it is to have qualitative information and comparing your best management practices with other cities so that you can replicate them and duplicate them within your processes, it's also really important to actually quantify some of these impacts and use some of these indicators to see how you fare amongst the other cities. So we decided to do a comparison with the other cities in the valley based on a service level, basically including the kind of services within the bulk waste programs that are being offered amongst these cities. Also at a cost level as to how much the citizens are being charged for these services that they're being offered, and also look at it from a fleet perspective. Now the fleet perspective happened to be a really important aspect of the bulk waste management program from our side because fuel consumption, the number of fleet vehicles that you have, the amount of labor that needs to be invested into these programs form a really important parameter, both from the environmental side, from the economic side, and also the social side. And so I think it covers all three pillars of sustainability, and therefore consideration for fleet is really important when you're looking at solid waste management programs. So if you look at a service level, both Gilbert and Chandler clearly emerge as leaders when you look at services like having weekly or monthly pickups, having hazardous waste facilities wherein appliances can be taken to, and then the hazardous substances are actually removed from these appliances and then sent to a scrap dealer to actually recycle them and generate revenue from that. Providing residents with free compost bins just to encourage the idea of composting and then using all of that waste in their yards. Also free appliance pickups and free landfill drop-offs. So if you look at this table right here, Gilbert and Chandler are actually providing all of these services to their residents, whereas the other cities provide like either 1 or 2 and maximum 3 services out of these. If you look at the cost level analysis, you would assume that since Gilbert and Chandler happen to provide so many services, they might actually be charging their citizens a lot more than the other cities are. But Gilbert is highlighted there in black, and it actually charges its residents $16 compared to pretty high fees like $27 Mesa, which is right here, and which is offers a pickup. And so it's really important to find the correlation between these services and the costs that actually the towns and the cities expend to provide these services to their residents. From the fleet management side, we try to look at like the different vehicle mix that you have. So that basically comprises of the types of vehicles that are being used in these fleets through these cities. So just looking at Tempe, Scottsdale, and Gilbert, Tempe and Scottsdale seem to have a really nice mix of front loaders, side loaders, and rear loaders, whereas Gilbert purely uses rear loaders, which are coupled with tractors. And if you look from a fuel mix side, actually, Tempe has a pretty much equal share of 21 CNG trucks versus 15 diesel trucks. Scottsdale has 21 CNG versus 28, but most of Gilbert's fleet is actually CNG, and whatever diesel trucks that are there remaining are either at the end of their lifetimes or are slowly going to be phased out, and then new CNG trucks are going to be coming in. Earlier, Yao actually pointed out that if you're looking at costs per mile and per gallon for collection in a diesel versus a CNG truck, is it just the fuel cost considerations that need to be taken into account when you're doing your analysis, or do you need to take into costs like personnel services, maintenance services? And so just for that aspect, we actually looked at Tempe just from a fuel perspective, and your prices are for CNG are 36% and 20% lower than it is for diesel engines when it comes to dollar per gallon and dollar per mile values. However, that just includes your fuel costs. However, and if you look at Gilbert's data and you actually include all the expenditures that actually go into this collection, that cost shoots up to $29 per mile and then $156 per ton. There are a lot of costs that have room for incorporating efficiency or actually being avoided when you're looking at these calculations, and those specific areas form really good focus areas to actually get cost reduction and not just looking at something from a fuel perspective.
So with this, we were able to provide short-term and long-term recommendations, and essentially we wanted to reevaluate the linear economy, right? So people buy products, they consume, and then they throw it away, and municipalities have to take care of it. So one of the things that we were thinking of, scratch that. So going over to the recommendations, our first and foremost, most important, we think, would be partnering with the nonprofits. Just to reiterate what Athi was talking about, was with Stardust, they basically salvage anything that's salvageable right before bulk collection in order to lower landfill, tipping fees, cost avoidance, and then people can buy cool furniture at stores, right? So, and that's also applicable with Goodwill as having a space to utilize if you were to convert. Like, you know, when we talked about Chandler's Recycling Center, having a mini version of that and finding space for that, basically having a little recycling facility. Goodwill has worked with other cities on providing that space and providing funds for that. Also, pre-sorting is like we did with the waste characterization. That was a clear example of how the waste diversion rate was extremely high and really efficient. And in theory, if you were to recycle all of those materials, we don't know the extent to exactly how much revenue that would create, but we have an idea that it would be greater than thus far being basically none, correct? And then kind of to go into item-specific initiatives would be the mattress recycling with Goodwill, and then the Christmas tree recycling, turning into compost. Other cities in the valley also do this, like Athi talked about. But then also what you could do is, we were thinking like small scale, using the compost for your own needs, and that's a big deal because that's cost avoidance, and you're directly seeing that through your funding and budgeting. And our last short-term recommendation would be increasing the amount of education and outreach. This also includes, you know, speaking to residents about how they want their bulk waste service to look like in 5 to 10 years. Do they want green waste? Is it applicable? Are they willing to see that added? And really making them a part of that process, because we had a great response in 1 week, having over 1,000 people respond. That's amazing. And just that response, people willing to, I don't see why more people wouldn't be willing to be in a more in-depth survey and target market type of research study. And this will lead us into our long-term recommendations.
So looking at just long-term recommendations, while we were drafting all these recommendations, we try to look at the entire process flow, which is on the right, and we try to tackle most of the phases of the process. And so while the short-term recommendations deal with stuff like generation at source, where you just reduce the volume of bulk waste that is being generated right at source, and then collecting it through other nonprofits, there are also important aspects like fleet management and scheduling. So just deep diving into scheduling for a moment here, Chandler follows a really different model compared to the other cities, wherein they actually schedule pickups only through call-ins. While the other cities have predefined routes that they go out on, and they have predefined service zones that they pick up bulk waste from, what Chandler does is partnering with waste management and then actually picking up all this bulk waste when residents actually call in. Now, one would actually think that it might not be as economically beneficial or environmentally beneficial, because you have to come up with an optimized route every day, but there are softwares that do that for you. And it actually has proven to save on productive man hours that are spent on the routes, because you know targeted locations that you're supposed to go and pick up and do these pickups. Also, it actually does save on fuel usage of these trucks, lesser maintenance going into the trucks because you're running lesser miles on these trucks. And so that might be one thing that the town of Gilbert might want to look at. Also, when it comes to fleet management, we notice that there's a variety and diversity of vehicles that are currently in the fleet that are servicing these bulk waste requests. Some of them are pretty old and actually do run on diesel, whereas most of the newer ones run on CNG. If you do an analysis as to how many miles are being run on all these trucks and throughout the year, you can see that even the diesel engines or some of the older engines which have like really low mileage are still doing a lot of miles. And just to be able to shift some of these miles to the newer trucks which have better mileage and not necessarily as much downtimes compared to the older ones, that could prove beneficial either in terms of like reducing the emissions due to lesser fuel use, and also the amount of money that is being spent, which would actually drive down your costs that were shown initially, which were the cost per mile and the cost per gallons. Also, another aspect that we looked at was idle time. This happened to be a really interesting topic because people might wonder how idle time fits into the bulk waste management picture. But when you actually look at older trucks, and we read a few case studies, it showed how older trucks had required more time to actually have operations and maintenance. They sometimes broke down and on these routes, and then also so just reducing the idle times on some of the older trucks and in general over the entire fleet might prove to be useful. Talking about strategic partnerships, we all know that it's not always as feasible to just wake up one day and open a new recycling facility or a new material recovery facility, basically owing to like capital constraints or not necessarily having enough demand, because even if you had the capital, you might not have enough demand within the town or the city. For example, the Phoenix facility, which has a capacity of 220,000 tons of composting that it can do, does not even run at like 60% of its capacity currently. And so it's really important to work with like neighboring cities and towns and partner on some of these facilities. Chandler has an excellent recycling facility for cardboard and metal, and we actually did visit them and interview with the person who's handling the facility, and they told us how they're never running at like full operational capacity, and they're always open to collaborating with other cities to actually use their facilities. Not only does this like generate like separate revenue streams for from recycling metal, cardboard, and e-waste, but it also actually gives you cost avoidance or cost reduction in terms of money that you save that you would have paid waste management or Republic Services in hauling all this waste to landfills and then tipping them. Another thing that we saw was from the waste characterization study was that a majority of the waste was green waste and which can be composted. The city of Avondale actually partners with regional composting farms, like I think Duncan Farms, and then there's Agritopia right in Gilbert itself. And so just partnering with these farms would be a great idea, since most of the waste, actually 46% of the waste is green waste. So these were some of the short-term and the long-term recommendations, and we think that there is no specific solution or idea that can solve something which is as wicked as solid waste management. And so it's really important to break it down into smaller processes or smaller phases, and then try to incorporate efficiency within these phases and try to come up with smaller solutions and then kind of build up on them and form a good complete portfolio of solutions. So with that, thank you. Here are our references. We are a